Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. I think we can get started. Welcome. Nice to see everybody. Okay, we'll today for sure. I don't want to say for sure, but we'll finish up, of course. Well, Birchat HaShachar. We were last week. We just sort of got to Terry Sorbati Farah and Noten Li'av Koach. So I just want to finish up a couple points, and then we'll have to start from Noten Li'av Koach. Okay, so we got the 15 blessings we say. In the morning, as we discussed already a number of times, originally they were said at home, and when you got dressed, and when you opened your eyes, when you sat up, when you put on your shoes, as we discussed last week, and went for a walk. And presumably, if you didn't do those things, you wouldn't say the bracha. They were personalized brachot. And then we switched them to the shul. People didn't know what to, it's too confusing for people. Tell them to say all these blessings in the morning, and then it became a sort of a communal form of prayer and or blessings, and then it was said regardless, even if they didn't necessarily apply to you on a personal level. Okay, so Oteri Servativara, I mentioned to cover our head in glory and in beauty, and I mentioned how that's of course the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. Clothes are important. We dress up, and our tefillin, Yecheskel, and the Yecheskel is referred. Yecheskel, even when he was a mourner, had to put on tefillin. Normally, mourners don't put on tefillin, but the pe'er is the beauty, and the mourner doesn't have that beauty. So the halacha is, of course, just an onen really doesn't put on tefillin, and this is really one of the few sources of a Siddur. One of the few sources of a kippah, as I'm sure most people know here. A kippah is really in the hierarchy of Jewish practices, it's very low. But that raises, of course, another issue we've discussed. Maybe we're starting Shmot next week. That often we have to judge things not just by their technical importance, we have to judge them by their social significance. And that's the beautiful comment of the Meshach Chachma that we said that the Jews were redeemed. There are various midrashim, but the ones people quote, even though it doesn't exist as one midrash, it's a compilation. We didn't change our names, language, and clothing. There is no such midrash. There are midrashim. We didn't change our names. You didn't change your clothes. You didn't change language. But those three don't appear in one midrash. But that's not relevant for us. But among those reasons, so he said that's very nice, but none of them are really important. Like Rav Moshe Feinstein, none of them are halachically mandated. But yet sometimes the little peripheral things they take on great importance. Sometimes a Jew wearing a Magen David will prevent them from intermarriage because they know they're Jewish. So sometimes things, that's what the Meshach Chachma passed away in 1926, the famous Rabbi in Dvinsk in Russia wrote a very important commentary on the Rambam, a commentary on the Chumash. So he says that you can't just view mitzvot in a technical level. Sometimes they take on great historical significance. And due to all kinds of factors, a mitzvah which is technically not so important becomes quite important, and other times a mitzvah that's technically important becomes less important. When Rav Schechter wrote about this in the first edition of the RJJ Journal, the Journal of Halakha and Contemporary Society, and that was in the early 80s, I believe. So he wrote in the first volume, he wrote on the mitzvah to live in Israel, and he quoted at the end that this is the mitzvah of our generation. In other words, in every generation, certain mitzvah take on greater importance. And in our generation, there was a mitzvah to live in the 1200 in Israel too, but it didn't really, how much influence, right? So you went to Israel, it was hard to live there. You were supported from Chutz La'aretz for the settlers, in the 1700s. In the they didn't have any industry there. But so things that take on importance. Anyway, so we know the kippah has taken on great importance. I mentioned, I ended off last week with the comment of Arnie Goodman, somebody I know here in Toronto, did his PhD, did this, his master's thing on the New Testament, that wearing a kippah was a reaction to Christianity, where they insisted that when you came to church, you had to take off your kippah. So we said, we're going to show them. We're going to wear our kippah. And that's why the Taz, the Torah Zav, a commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, living in the 1600s, the Taz writes that not to wear a kippah is a biblical violation of the prohibition of following in the ways of the idolaters. Chukat hagoyim, there's a prohibition, so it's sort of kind of relevant at this time of year, maybe, that you're not allowed to follow in the ways of the idolaters. So he says not wearing a kippah is following in those ways. So that's pretty wild. A kippah that's barely mentioned in the Talmud. It may be a custom. That's about it. and yet it rises to the level of not following the ways of the idolaters. So Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that already isn't true, and that's why if you go to work and you're uncomfortable or you're afraid you won't get a promotion, people are going to look at you strange. So Rav Moshe writes, you don't have to wear kippah at work. It's only a custom. It's not such an important custom. It's not even mentioned in the Talmud. So again, you have this. But anyways, Oter Shavei Tifra, to cover our head is the idea to know that there's God above us. It is a beautiful idea. And we mentioned that Oter Yisrael B'Tifra and Ozer Yisrael B'Bra. Ozer Yisrael B'Bra is basically tzniut, to divide our upper and our lower body. We gird our body in strength. We cover, the physical and the spiritual. We differentiate between them. So those two are the only ones that refer to the Jewish people. All the other brachot are universal. I mean, the Shalom Asani Goy was added later, but the opening our eyes, walking, putting on clothes, standing on the ground, those are universal brachot, have nothing to do with the Jewish people. Oter Yisrael B'Tifra and Ozer Yisrael B'Bra, of course, are a internal Jewish mitzvah. They're only ones that, be Yisrael. They are specific. And of course, that's, I often mention the one area today where Jewish ethics and secular ethics, whatever term you want to use, are the most distinct is in sexual ethics. Decent people believe you should be honest in business and you should give charity. All the beautiful things we believe in, that's fine. That's what we're human beings do. That's part of the Torah. The Torah system. When it comes to the sexual ethics, the difference between what our society says and what the Jewish tradition preaches and teaches, teaches is very, very different, as we all know. So that's here pointing that out, and we know Hatznei Lechadim Elokecha. That's sort of one of the three pillars from the prophet of Micha, to walk modestly, and we know, of course, that's much more than clothing. That's just one aspect. Okay, let's discuss Hanotin Le'Avkoach, which I think I just mentioned last week, is not mentioned in the Talmud. I'll show you in a moment when we get to in Brachot 60b, where all these blessings are mentioned. This bracha is not appear. This was post-Talmudic, just like Shasani Kirtzono is post-Talmudic, and therefore some people didn't want to say it. Rav Soloveitchik, I'm sure many of you may know, Rav Soloveitchik was very small c conservative when it came to anything involving our ritual practices. He was, Rav Soloveitchik felt that a modern man doesn't have the capacity to compose a prayer that should be said. No, we don't agree with him. What do I mean we don't agree with him? I mean, the modern Orthodox community was sort of, which Rav Soloveitchik, sort of our mentor and leader, has not accepted his view. Rav Soloveitchik was opposed to extra kinot on Tisha B'Av for the Holocaust. He was opposed to the prayer for the state of Israel as part of our in the middle of the davening. He was opposed to saying Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut after Shmona Esrei, not because he didn't believe in its importance. He said, you can say it after davening, but he believed that we don't have the power to compose tefillot. I think I mentioned the way at the beginning when the Gemara says, it's in the second Megillah, which we just started in Daf Yomi, coming up in a couple of weeks, that the Shmona Esrei was composed by Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, Ubehem Kama Nevi'im. And among the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah were a few prophets. And Rav Soloveitchik said that's the key phrase, that in order to compose a prayer for the Jewish people, you need to have basically prophecy. So we don't, that view is not being accepted. And it's clear our Siddur has added things on the time, and it's clear, I'm sure I may know people, but I don't know of anybody who doesn't say Hanoten Le'Avkoach. I've never been to a shul and the chazan skips that bracha Hanoten Le'Avkoach. But you should know in the Rishonik, the medieval period, people did talk about not saying that bracha because it's not in the Talmud, and we don't take God's name and we don't just invent new brachot. By the way, a tefillah can be without a bracha. Avinu Shebashamayim Tzur Yisrael v'Golo Barechet Mitinat Yisrael Reshit Tzmicha Kulatenu is a tefillah. It's not a bracha. We don't invoke. We don't say Birchat Hashem. So that may be a little bit different. Anyway, so why was it added? So that's very nice. Okay, it's not in the Talmud, so it got added. So I don't know exactly the point that got added, but I think, let me show you probably why it added. And I part of this I heard from Rabbi Liebtag. Let me share my screen for a moment, and we'll show you a verse that probably you're not so familiar with, because that's I don't know how well people know Tanakh. Yeshayahu. Okay, so everybody knows the 40th chapter in Sefer Yeshayahu. Even if you don't know, you know it, because it's the famous chapter we read on Shabbos Nachamu Ami Yomar Aleichem. Time to comfort. We read this after Tisha B'Av, and there's a beautiful Torah. And we know the second half of Yeshayahu is such beautiful nivuot, and it's so different from the first half. That people say it's a different person. It can't be the same Yeshayahu who composed. Okay, that's not an issue. The Haftorah ends, I believe, in verse 25, around there, and then 3 verses later, we have the pasuk in the same chapter 40 in Yeshayahu. It's really twice in a sense. Lo yev lo yigeh, noten laya'ef koach ule'ein onim atzma yirbeh. He gives strength to the weary, fresh vigor to the spent. So this bracha, hanoten li'av koach, we said basically, right, the theme that so much of our tefillah is rooted in biblical text. That's where our tefillah comes from. So this bracha, hanoten li'av koach, comes from Sefer Yeshayahu to comfort the Jewish people after destruction. And that's, if we think about the history of the Jewish people, so we begin to understand why they would add a blessing of hanoten li'av koach. This is bracha, is to sort of give hope to the Jewish people who are weary and tired, that God, it's meant to be as a comfort and bracha. Of course, if you don't know that verse in Yeshayahu, you would think, and that's the way, what does hanoten li'av koach mean? That God gives the people, when you wake up in the morning, he gives the tired strength. You go to bed, right? You say this, hanoten li'av koach, God gives strength. He gives us physical strength. That's true. But if you look at it in the broader context, and especially if you consider it wasn't mentioned in the Gemara, God added. So we have a lot of things like that. The Jewish people just demand certain things, after so many years of exile, there's certain things. This is what we do. And very often, Tosfot, that's Jacob Katz's theory on some of the things on Tosfot, dealing with Christianity, is sometimes the people do things and the rabbis find reason and justification later. So I don't know. I'm not saying this came from the people. I don't know where it came from, but this hanoten li'av koach, I think it's a beautiful addition. It's not just a private bracha that we put on our shoes and we walk and we can stand up and bend over and all those other things, but it's a nationalistic bracha that God gives power and strength and vigor to the Jewish people, which, thank God, in our generation we've seen come in many ways after the horrific things of the Holocaust. I will point out, of course, Ozer Yisrael b'gvura and hanoten li'av koach. So we have in Hebrew 2 words for strong, koach and gvura, gibor and koach. What's the difference between gvura and koach, or gibor and koach? What's the difference? We have a lot of this. The Malbim does this all the time. That's his specialty. The Meir Levush, the Malbim died 130 years ago. So in his commentary, this says he does that. I
think Gibor means more like physical, whereas Gvura is more spiritual.
You said the same thing. Gibor, you mean koach.
Koach is
correct.
Koach is strength.
Koach is physical strength.
And
Gvura is spiritual strength.
Gvura is spiritual.
Correct. Yeah. Koach means strong, and Gibor means, I don't know how to translate the word Gibor, also strength, but in English doesn't capture it. So I'm looking now at the Koran, and both by Koach and Gvura, the bracha, they both say strength, because that's a translation.
What about fortitude?
I'm sorry?
Fortitude?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
The word fortitude for Gvura?
Fortitude, maybe. No, it's physical. Ezehu Gibor hakovesha titro. Gibor is spiritual strength. You're strong enough to overcome your
inclination. So I think that's what, all right, I'll look it up.
Yeah, and Ozer Yisrael b'gvura, that's how it's explained, the sexual restraint and the distinction between the physical and the spiritual body. Ya'ef, one who's tired, needs physical strength. So koach and gvura, and of course both are important, but gvura is more important, so let's say, but Ozer Yisrael b'gvura, so and hanoten li'av koach. So those are the two aspects. We have this all over the often. I mean, every time you have 2 words, or in the Shevach is Gila, Rina, Ditza, Chedva, Ava, Biakva. Like, you have to know why do we use that, and so that's it's a more, that was the approach of the Malbim, all the time when this comes up, he'll tell you what the difference is, and he'll show you examples. It's very beautiful how precise the language is when these similar words, but they have slight different nuances of meaning. Okay, so that's Hanoten Le'akol. Then what comes next? So in our Siddur, we have this long bracha. Birchat Hashem Elokeinu Chalam HaMe'avir Sheinai Me'enai Tefillah Me'afafai. God who removes sleep from my eyes and slumber from my, here they translate, eyelids. Yehiratzon Mefanecha Hashem Elokeinu V'Gevutenu. That's like an, Yehiratzon Mefanecha, like for Rosh Chodesh pension. May it be the will of God and God of our fathers, Shetargileinu V'Toratecha, and we'll go through the whole thing. Where does this bracha come from? Well, why do we say this bracha? And it doesn't really, it says God removes sleep from my eyes. Well, we've sort of said that in a certain pokeach ivrim a little bit. We open our eyes, but there's a difference between opening our, we open our eyes in the morning, we're still, groggy and half asleep, and we got can't quite, see, so we got to wash our face. So there is a difference. So let's just take a quick look at the Gemara in Brachot, and we'll see something I think a little interesting, I hope. Okay, so let's go here. Brachot 60, where are we here? Okay, so Brachot 60, this is, we've gone to this many times, when you hear the voice of the rooster, Noten Sakvi, these are all the Brachot, and it really started when you go to bed at night, go to the washroom, all these things. So here, Ozeri Sobi Gvura, when you put Kipari Sudra Reshe, when you put a hat or a kippa, a talit, a covering, in modern Hebrew, Siddur is a handkerchief. When you put a covering on your head, Baruch Ter Yisrael B'Tifara. God, then, like I mentioned, there's no Hanoten Liyah. If that doesn't occur in the Gemara. Then the Gemara continues. Kimate b'tzitzis. So the next thing you do is you put on your tzitzis. That's interesting. And say Birchat Hashem Elokeinu Chalam Asher Kishem Tzitav Litatei B'tzitzit. Then you put your tefillin on. It's obviously talking to men. I mean, maybe dating, not so obvious, but the Gemara was obvious. It was referring to men. And in general, it's just the way it is. We know our texts are male centric. It's given from the rabbis of the Talmud. I've mentioned many times. Mark Shapiro used to point this all the time, but it's so true when you learn Talmud. The Talmud was not only written for men; it was written for rabbis. If the rabbis of the Talmud knew that there would be daf yomi, they'd be rolling over in their graves, because some of the things you read in the Talmud is like unbelievable. So we know everybody within a certain profession, they talk a certain way. The way they insult each other, I don't want to say constantly, but you go through daf yomi in 7.5 years, you're going to find many, many insults of rabbis. But you have to know, to us, they sound horrific. But and sometimes they were. Rav Huna, Rav Chisda, sometimes they were pretty bad and terrible things happened. Other times it's just the way speak. People talk to each other, and the language, and sometimes the way they refer to ignorant Jews is not so nice. So because the Talmud was not written to be studied massively. This is not our point here to discuss it, but it is important to note the rabbis are talking to other rabbis. They're assuming people studying Talmud are learned, and they don't need a translation, that's for sure. And whatever, but okay, things have changed. That's the way it works. Often changes are good. So, okay, then we say our tefillin, and when you put it on your hand, you say tefillin. Aresh, when you put it on your head, say v'tzivenu a mitzvah tefillin. That you say mitzvah. So here, by the way, you see the two brachot on tefillin. If I'm not mistaken, and somebody can please, if they know, can let me know. I believe the Sfardim only say one bracha. They do not say that second bracha al mitzvah tefillin. We know you're not allowed to talk between the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, because that's like one mitzvah. And even if there's, and that's why you don't see it here in the Gemara. The Ashkenazic custom is to say, Asher Kishan Mitzvah Mitzvah Tefillin, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. Right? I'm sure people who put on.
There are even Ashkenazim who don't say the second.
Okay, there you go. So if you look in the Gemara,
there definitely are people who do not say Svarim, definitely not, and some Ashkenazim don't say it either.
Okay, so it's interesting why, because from this Gemara, the Gemara doesn't quote a machloket. There's not two opinions. The Gemara is very clear. You have the hand and the head. Okay, that's not for now, but just point out. But because of the question whether to say it, the Ashkenazic practice is to throw in Baruch Shem Kol Malchut Olam Ved, which is what you say if you accidentally make a bracha you shouldn't have made. If you take God's name, quote unquote, in vain, so you say Baruch Shem Kol, okay, we're going to praise God. Baruch Shem Kol Malchut Olam Ved. So maybe we shouldn't have said the bracha. So we say, it's like a funny idea. We're going to say the bracha, but just in case we shouldn't say the bracha, we'll say Baruch Shem Kol Malchut Olam Ved. That's not, there's something missing there that I don't fully get, because in general, the halach is when there's a doubt, safek brachot lakel, the general rule always, because all brachot except for Birchat Hamazon and possibly Birchat Torah are all rabbinic in nature, and therefore we don't want to invoke God's name. We have to be invoking God's name should not be taken lightly. So wherever we're in doubt, we don't make a bracha. But the Gemara says pretty clearly you make a bracha. Okay, then the Gemara says kima she'ape, when you wash your face. Before we washed our hands, right? And we said al netilat yadayim. So this is our bracha. Hamavir shkavlei shenam enayt v'ame'afai yiratzom afanecha shem elokai shetargilenu v'toratecha v'davkeinu mitzvotecha. Oh God, prevent us from sin, etc. So this is a very long bracha. We'll get there in one moment. And as to when you wash your face, so it's very interesting. What in the world happened here? You said Oter Yisrael b'tifara. Oh, yes, you don't say Hanota in the Av Koach. And then you put on your tzitzis, and then you put on your tefillin. Whoa, what's going on? So we just discussed, these brachot were said at home. These brachot were said at home. By the way, when did you put on your tzitzit or talit? The custom today is when you have a talit, a gadol, like, a regular talit, you don't make a bracha on the tzitzis, right? Unless maybe some people have another custom. I'm not aware of that. But when someone who doesn't wear a talit makes a bracha on tzitzit. But once you wear a talit gadol, we don't make two brachot, one on the talit kata, one on the talit gadol. But why do we interrupt the Birchat HaShachar, which we don't do anymore, with tzitzis and tefillin? So the simple reason is because if you look, the old custom was you're supposed to put on tefillin at home and walk in the street to shul. Now, I don't know, has anybody ever noticed in your shuls that some people don't put on tefillin in shul? What I mean, they put it in the lobby of the shul. And so it is you walk into shul with your tefillin and talis on. Now, most of us, we walk into shul and we find a chair, a table, we put our talis and tefillin down, and then we, and then we put on the tefillin. But the real minhag was you put it on at home and then you walk to shul. It's not advisable to do that anymore. I remember Rav HaShachar once told us, we've mentioned over time this concept of yuhara. You're not allowed to show off mitzvot. We be humble. That's what we're talking about. Be very humble. We don't show off mitzvot. So some people say it's prohibited to wear your tzitzis out unless you're Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Sullivan. You're a great Torah scholar, and everybody can wear your tzitzis out. For average people, maybe they shouldn't. Okay, whatever you consider yuhara. You're not wearing tefillin all day is considered yuhara. That's for sure. To wear tefillin all day. That's the original minhag. If you're Rav Victor in Evansall, you can wear tefillin all day. But we're not Rav Victor in Evansall. The Rav of the old city. He's a tzaddik. He's one of the Lamed Vavniks. Okay, Beseder, he can wear tefillin all day. But today, to walk in the street wearing tefillin, that's if you live in Yerushalayim and you're going, or you live in Worms in Germany maybe, and the whole street is all Jewish, and the Jewish quarter is 4 blocks, surrounded by a wall. Okay, maybe you can do that, but you can do this. So I remember Rav HaShachar told us there was somebody who was davening in Breuer's in Washington Heights, and he would walk on the street with his tefillin. So Rabbi Breuer or Rabbi Schwab, I think he went to YU or something. So he asked Rav HaShachar, tell him it's mechse ki yuhara. That's the expression the Gemara uses. It looks like it's arrogant. It's mechse. It looks like arrogant. So Rav HaShachar said he told the guy it's not mechse ki yuhara. It is yuhara mamash. It's real thing, but he said the guy didn't get it. He didn't want to, whatever. So now I know why your rabbi puts tefillin on in the lobby. So you see from the Gemara, you remember we're making the brachot at home, then you put on your tefillin, and then you put on your talis, right? Why do we put on our talis before the tefillin? By the way, anybody? Why? Okay, I'm sure half the people here don't put on talis or tefillin, but why? For those who put on the talis and tefillin, why do we put on a talis first? What's holier? What's holier?
Maybe talus is part of dressing.
Tadir she'eno tadir.
There you go. Tadir v'sheino tadir kodam. What you do every day, what you do more regularly, and what you do on occasion, tadir kodam. That's why Beit Hillel says we make bori pri hagafen before Mekadesh HaShabbat on Kiddush and Beit Shammai disagrees. It's not that he doesn't agree with the principle of tadir v'sheino tadir. This is a Mishnah in Menachot. Menachot or Zvachim, I forget now. The 10th parak of either Menachot or Zvachim, where the Torah is talking, the Mishnah is talking about which korbanot go first, probably Zvachim, that the korban tamid is before the korban of Rosh Chodesh or before the korban Mitzvah, because the korban tamid is every day. That's what it means, tamid. And so we do. On the other hand, kol hakadosh mechavero kodem lechaver, whatever's more holy. So sometimes we have conflicts. It's not the only principle. Like everything in Judaism, there's never just one principle. There are a variety of principles, but the reason, because tefillin are holier, for sure. You can walk into the bathroom. What's your talus? Talus you can throw in the garbage. I don't mean to, it doesn't sound nice, but that's what the Gemara says. Tashmishe mitzvah nizrakim. When something is used for a lulav, an etrog, a talis, something that's used for a mitzvah doesn't have any inherent holiness, doesn't have God's name written anywhere. Nizrakim, you can throw it out. So you wrap it, you put it in recycling, you throw it out nicely, but you don't throw it. Tashmishe kedusha, the tefillin, the what's it called? On the bima, you have not a carpet, I can't think of the word, where you put on the Sefer Torah, that felt thing. That also, because a Torah lies in it. You can't throw that in the garbage, even though it doesn't have God's name. You have to put it into shemesh. So tefillin, on the one hand, there is a reason to put tefillin first. Would be a reason because it has greater kedusha. But of course, our practice is based on tadir v'sheino tadir. We take off we put on the tefillin first. We also take off the tefillin first. We put on the. I'm sorry. We put on the talis first, and then the tefillin. And then we take off the tefillin first. But so what happened? They made the brachos. They came to shul, and they made Birchat HaShachar, put on their talis, put on the tefillin. But it's funny. I don't know. Maybe somebody can explain. And only then they wash their face. You look how the Gemara puts it. You say, right? It says hanotein layayiv koach. Right? You said hanotein layayiv koach. Just I'll show you again, just to see it. I find it's a little strange. I don't quite get it. Hanotein layayiv koach, and then not hano. Oteri shabati farah. Then you put on your tzitzis, you put on your tefillin, and then you wash your face. I don't really understand that. Maybe somebody, I haven't found anybody who talked about it, but that was the order. Of course, we do it differently. This becomes a bracha after Birchat, or after Birchat HaShachar, the last of Birchat HaShachar. Now, just so this bracha is a little bit different. So it starts with Baruch and ends with Baruch, right? So we know already in the first parak of Mishnayot, in Mishnah in Brachot, we start brachot, that's how the Mishnah begins with Kriyat Shema. So in the first chapter talks about Birchat Kriyat Shema. Before we say Shema, we say a bracha. But by the way, we don't say a bracha to say Shema, right? Just a little, we don't say Birchat Hashem Elokeinu Melech Asher Kitshanu Mitzvotav V'tzivanu Likro et Shema. We say for Hallel. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et hallel. So, and hallel is probably only a rabbinic mitzvah. Maybe sometimes it's a biblical mitzvah. Why don't we say a bracha on Shema? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al kriyat Shema.
If you've got brachas before and afterwards.
Good, very good, because the brachas Yotzer Morad and Ava Rabat. It's not that. In other words, the rabbi said you say other brachot. That of course, whenever the mitzvah is through a bracha, you don't need an individual bracha. But so, and we have two brachot before Kriyat Shema and one after, and they're long brachot. What's the difference? The Mishnah? A long bracha and a short bracha. So long and short, it does, but it doesn't really mean how many words it's in it, although it's connected. A long bracha means it begins with Baruch and it ends with Baruch. So we say, Baruch atah Hashem Yotzer Or Borei Choshech Oseh Shalom Urei Takol. That's the beginning of the bracha. And then we say, Baruch atah Hashem Yotzer Hamarot. That's the first bracha. Then we say, Ava Rabbah, Rabat Olam, right? So that doesn't start with a a baruch because there's a general principle in Jewish law. When two brachot are back to back, the second bracha doesn't open with the a baruch. The Ava Rabbah is a continuation. The Yotzer Marot serves as the ending bracha of the first and the beginning of the second. So, but a bracha arucha, a long bracha, means you have a bracha at the beginning and you have a bracha at the end. So that's Kiddush. I mean, Kiddush, not Bori Pri Hagafen. That's not the bracha at the beginning. We make Kiddush with wine. We say Bori Pri Hagafen. Then we say Birchat Hashem, Shirkit Shanam Mitzvah, V'ratzavanu, V'shav, whatever it is. I am only on Friday night do I know it by heart. And then Birchat Hashem, Mekadesh HaShabbat, right? The Baruch begins and ends with the work. So that's what we have here. Birchat Hashem, Hamavir Sheinai Me'inai Tvam Efai, God who wipes away the slumber and the sleep from my eyes. I'm washing my face. It's not just I open my eyes, I can see. Now I can see with real vigor. And then it ends, Birchat Hashem, Gomel Chasadim Tovim Lamo Yisrael. And God does great acts of kindness to the Jewish people. Now, it's interesting. There is a rule. So the commentaries wonder, there is a rule that when you ever have a long bracha, quote unquote, a baruch at the beginning and the end, so the themes have to repeat itself. The ending of the bracha has to come to the theme of the beginning. So let's say Havdalah. Baruch Hashem hamavdil ben kodesh v'chol ben or l'choshev ben Yisrael amin ben yom shleishesh masa Baruch Hashem hamavdil ben kodesh v'chol. Right, I guess that's it has to repeat the same theme from the beginning of the bracha. So the commentaries wonder. The first bracha talks about opening our eyes, or washing our face, whatever. And the end is Gomel Chasadim Tovim Yisrael. I don't even know why they wonder exactly, but I guess they point out that the great act of kindness of God, in other words, Gomel Chasadim Tovim is a general thing. It has nothing to do with washing our face. So in general, so they say, no, it does. The fact that we can wash our face. What happens when you wash your face? You're ready for the day, right? Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, you can't wash. It's like you feel yuck, you don't feel good. You're not supposed to feel good. But a mourner, Rahman al-Litzan, doesn't wash their face, right? Isn't supposed to. We have all these rules. So, but the great act of kindness is really that we get up in the morning, we are refreshed. In other words, you get up and we are refreshed. Okay, now just let's go over a few things in the bracha itself. So we should be, what's targilena b'tortecha? We should do mitzvot habitually, I would say. Behergel, it should become a habit. V'dabkeinu b'mitzvotecha, and we should cling to mitzvot. Debek in modern Hebrew is glue. Al tevieni lo lidei, do not bring us to the hand of sin. V'lo lidei aveira avon, sin and sin, right? We know there are different types of sin. Here it's slightly different. We know in Rosh Hashanah there's a chet, avon, and a pesha. A chet means an unintentional sin. You were careless, you didn't know it was wrong. Even though in secular law, and a little bit in Jewish law, ignorance is no defense, right? I think that's the principle of law. The lawyers can tell me that. Ignorance is no defense of the law. You go to court and say, I didn't know it was against, I didn't know I couldn't go through a red light at 3 o'clock in the morning when there are no cards. I thought it turns into a stop sign, to give a silly example. The court's they'll laugh at you. Ignorance is no defense. But in Judaism is a little nicer. It's a little bit of a defense. It's not a great defense, but that's the severity, of course, is much less. Then you have an avon, where it's wrong, but you have a yetzer hara. What can we do? We like to talk lashon hara. We like to cheat in business, make some more money. No, what can you do? It's bad, but okay. And then you have a peshet. That's even worse. I don't like non-kosher food, but you like. I don't really like cheeseburgers, but I know you keep kosher. And so I'm going to come and I'm going to eat a cheeseburger in front of your face just to show you that I couldn't care less about this Judaism stuff. So that's a rebellious sin. And we always mention we all rebel. So that's an extreme example. Nobody here is going to do that. But we do other things. We all know that. Out of spite, out of rebellion. So that's one thing you say. But here we use the word aveira and avon. We don't use the word pesha, which is interesting. But we have the word chet and avon. Now, Targilena v'Torah Techad. So this is an interesting thing. In Chaim Soloveitchik's, seminal article that if you haven't read, the most important thing in today's class is to read Chaim Soloveitchik's famous article, Rupture and Reconstruction. I'm sure many of you, if you haven't heard about it, I imagine most people have heard of the article. If you haven't read it yourself, you have to read it. The article is so important that last year Tradition had a whole 20 articles in Tradition. He asked 20 people to write about the article 25 years later. In other words, what's been the impact? How have things changed in the 25 years since that article was written, Rupture and Reconstruction, which is how the changing nature of Orthodoxy. It's unbelievable art. Everybody he nailed it on the head. The changes in the Orthodox world, Rupture and Reconstruction is the name of the article. It was originally published in some, non-Jewish form, and had a totally different name. Where 8.5 people read it, and no Orthodox Jews would read it. And then he republished it. I think he adapted it a little bit with permission, and he published it in Tradition, which of course is catering to a journal of Orthodox Jewish thought, or whatever their tagline is. It's catering to Orthodox people. And the article took everybody read it. He went around the world talking about the article, about the changes in Orthodoxy. But one of the things he points out in the article is, if I remember now, is the idea of hergel. Mitzvah being that, he said, we went to a mimetic tradition. We've gone from a mimetic tradition to a text-based tradition. Judaism used to be natural, and it's become textual. And of course, he's critical of that. In other words, how did you keep Shabbat? You saw what your mother did. And here he talks about the beauty of, it's the mothers who passed down our tradition. And when you learned in yeshiva and you came home and you told your mother, when you take the pitch, when you eat watermelon, it's borer, what they teach you in yeshiva, the mother would tell you, go jump in the lake. This is how we do this, how your grandmother did it. My mother, grandmother, you can learn what you want in yeshiva, but we run the home here. And that's what's called a mimetic tradition. And he said, because of the rupture, the Holocaust and change, and so many people not religious and everything lost, we reconstructed Judaism, rupture and reconstruction. We reconstructed it differently, Judaism as it should have been, or as it never was. And we reconstructed it, and everything now becomes based on text. Because much of our tradition, according to the text, how can you do that? The Mishnah Berurah says you can't. I don't care what the Mishnah Berurah says. That's the way. I shouldn't. That's a harsh statement. We have different traditions in the Mishnah Berurah. We didn't. There wasn't this focus on text. It was a tradition based. So part of that, he says, is mitzvot used to be natural. There's a hergel, a targilenu b'mitzvotecha. Or pargilenu b'torah techa. It should be natural. You don't have to think about it. Now, on the one hand, that's great. On the other hand, it's not so good. You want to think about it, but no. When I put on tzitzis in the morning, I don't think about it. It's natural. Like I tell my kids at chat, they don't understand these things. Most of them, not putting on tefillin is like not putting on underwear. Pardon the comparison, lahavdil. In other words, you wouldn't walk out of your house not without an undershirt or whatever. You just, that's what you do. It's just, now maybe I'm half asleep, maybe I'm not paying attention, but there's a certain beauty when mitzvot are second nature. We don't even think about what we're doing. That's what we do. We wake up and we do mitzvot. When you sort of have to think about everything, you've lost something. So that's just an idea to throw out. It's not all right. Obviously, we want the mitzvot to have meaning on it, but you can't go your whole day. In other words, mitzvot should be second nature. Remember, we don't say Birchat HaTorah when we learn again at night. We go to Daf Yomi Shir, whatever you do in the morning, we learn a little bit. You go to work for 10 hours and you come home and you open up a sefer. We don't say Birchat HaTorah because when you were at work all day, that was practical Torah. When you learn the Gemara, that's theoretical Torah, but we have to put Torah into practice. So go to work. There are more mitzvot in the Torah in many areas than any other area. Like over 120 mitzvot of the 613 relate to our finances in some way or another. Mayor Tamari points that out, one of the leaders in the field in Jewish business ethics. There are more mitzvot than money because that's what we do all day, and that's where we have a big Yetzer Hara. So we shouldn't have to think every second, is this allowed, is it not allowed? It should be second nature. The way a Jew acts, our honesty and integrity should not be something we have to think about. It should just be, if once you have to think about it, then you might think not about it, if you know what I mean. I think that's idea here. We ask God, and the Rabban, who's a medieval German commentary says that this bracha was actually, it says in the bracha when we wash our face. That's hamabir sheinah. But he said this bracha was really instituted when we go to work. And that's probably, right at the end. It's going out into the business world. That's what the bracha has said. So, and when we go into the business world, we have a big Yetzer Hara. Because as the Talmud said, the three areas of sin that everybody does the most is in speech. Everybody gossips a little bit, in sexuality, and in monetary matters. When you're out in the business world, it's very hard. Chamishim tzadikim b'toch ha'ir, right? The beautiful comment of Ibn Ezra, when Abraham prays, tells God, God, you can't destroy Sodom. No way. And God agreed with Abraham, by the way. It's not that God disagreed. God just, okay, find me 50. Okay, find me 40, find me 10, and I won't destroy. So in Ulayesh Chamishim Tzadikim B'toch Hayir, and the Ibn Ezra has this beautiful comment, a tzaddik is only a tzaddik if he's B'toch Hayir, if he's working on Wall Street or Bay Street. To be a tzaddik in the Beis Medrash doesn't mean much. I mean, I don't mean to minimize it, but it's. I taught you the line, I believe, of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and if I haven't, I'll tell you now. Weren't there, and if I have, it's good repeating. So, that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the story, a butcher once came to him and said, "I'm quitting. I don't want to be a butcher anymore." So why not? He said, "Because I shecht a cow. 300 people eat from one cow. I don't know how many people. A lot of people eat from one cow. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe the shechita was no good. It happens to make a mistake, and nobody knows. I didn't realize there was a nick on the knife. I don't want to be responsible for 300 people eating and every day. If I make 10 mistakes a year, thousands of people are eating treifa meat because of me." So Rabbi Shoshan said, "So what are you going to do with your life? How are you going to make a living?" He says, "I'm going to go into business." So Rabbi Shoshan said, "Business? You're worried about sinning? Be a shochet. That's nothing. Going to business every second of the day. There are challenges, competition, lying, the whole business culture. What do you mean? There are so many challenges to be a religious Jew in the business world. A shochet, no, so, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Mistake, a chet, you shecht, okay. But in the business world, wow, the Yetzer Hara, the pressure to conform and to make money and to cut corners, it's next to impossible. So that's that's what then he added, it takes twice as much strength. I think it's 200 times more strength to be a religious businessman or business person than to be a rabbi. And nobody's going to go to the rabbi. Maybe today our society is so corrupt that people will go to the rabbi and offer them a shady deal. But the normal situation, they offer their shady deals to their business partners. They don't offer them to their rabbis. And rabbi, let them learn Gemara all day. Let them be poor, whatever. Okay, so it takes much more strength. But if you have the strength, why go into business? But that's the people who want in the rabbinate, teaching Torah. So it's, of course, the ultimate religious Jew is applying Torah in the real world. So that's what this bracha is. You're going to the real world. We need people to teach. We need rabbis. But the Torah is meant to be b'toch ha'ir. That's what Torah is all about. Like everything, we need scientists doing research, but we got to apply the science in the real world. So anyway, so that's what this bracha, to be tested, because you're tested for sure out in the business world. We don't want to be tested because we often fail. That's another, we don't challenge the Yetzer Hara, we outflank the Yetzer Hara. That's the traditional Jewish approach. If you take the Yetzer Hara on straight, the evil inclination, you're going to lose. But if you outsmart him, you got to use your brains so we don't want the test. Loli de nisayon, and it is a big test. It's hard, but okay. But if you can do it, it's beautiful. It's the ultimate. Loli de bisayon. We shouldn't be degraded. Right? Sometimes they get embarrassed out there. People make fun of us. Bal tashleit b'no Yetzer Hara, and the inclination, the evil inclination, shouldn't master over us. Again, it's very easy. It's so important to realize that when we go to work, it's not divorced from learning. Work is an extension of learning. And once we consider, I mentioned in Saul Berman, I mentioned this a while ago, I don't mean to pick on any individual group, but he said that when people see work as only Nebuch's work, that real people learn all day. If Nebuch, you have to go to work, what can you do? So if you see work like that, it's going to be harder to be honest in work, because work is divorced from the business world psychologically. But if you see work as a fulfillment, fulfillment, so many mitzvot connected to work, the whole Torah. If there's 120 mitzvot about money, it means because the Torah expects people to be going to work and farming. That's what the Torah expects. A few people. So if you see the work divorced from the Torah, it's much worse. If you see the work as an extension of Torah, you have a better chance of fighting off. There's the Yetzer Hara out there to work. And, I did work in the business world, and I worked in the account for 10 years. Okay, it wasn't quite the same thing. I worked for firms. It wasn't, didn't have, but still, it's a different world out there. And I think I once mentioned I don't know if I ever mentioned here, I was 25 years old. I went to work for the first time. I had gotten smicha at YU, but I worked as an accountant. I was in New York City and Manhattan, working in the city, living in Flatbush. And I was blown away by the language that people used at work, the coarse language. I couldn't, it's just not what I was used to. I came from, my whole life, I lived in a bubble, went to Jewish schools, went to yeshiva in Israel, went to YU, and then you come to the world and the way people talk, and it was just like, and I'm not even necessarily talking about 4-letter words, which people do use, but just the whole manner of speech. So it takes getting used to, but it's easy to get caught up. And so that's what this bracha, that's what the Rabban explains. That's what this bracha is. Loli day, nisayon, bizayon, the Yetzer Hara shouldn't rule over us. You should make us far from a bad person and a bad friend. Of course, a bad friend doesn't mean a friend who's not nice to you. It means a friend who has a bad influence on you. And I again, the word harchek. So as far as I know, I think most people should know, right? There's only one mitzvah in the Torah that says you have to run away from, I think, right? Which is? What's the only thing the Torah says you have to run away from? It says you shouldn't eat non-kosher food. Okay.
Midvar sheker tirchak.
There you go. Midvar sheker tirchak. Which makes it sound worse. I mean, you have to run away. It's not enough not to lie. You have to run away from lies. You can't even get close. So it's funny because it's not even true, because lying is one of the areas we are allowed to lie. Because on occasion, like I said, there's no value in Judaism that's absolute. There's always conflicting and contextual issues we have to deal with. So yes, we all know for Shalom Bayit.
It just comes up in this week's parsha.
Yes, where the brothers lied to Yosef, about the,
right.
But that's such a blatant lie. Obviously, Yosef must have figured it out, right? But so it's actually an interesting question. When is that considered a lie? In other words, that's the famous discussion about lying. What do you do? How do you dance before the bride? So Beit Shammai, Beit Shammai tells it like it is. Kala k'moshehi. You have to, the color is not so beautiful. When they fix you up on a date and they tell you the color is great midot, you kind of have to wonder what they're not telling you, right? So I remember, I shouldn't say these things, but I remember when we were dating years ago, my friend said, I paskin like Beit Shammai. He wants to go on a date. When they say the girl is beautiful, he paskins like Beit Shammai. He doesn't paskin like Beit Hillel, that every color is beautiful. He wants, all right. Or anyway, he would say, or he'd say that when the slave, you go in single, you come out single. But he says it wasn't V'yatzachina mein kesef. All right, if you don't get the joke, it's good. Like that's a pasuk in Mishpatim that they're using for purposes. Okay, I'm sorry for that. But anyway, mitvar sheker tirchak, you have to go far away from a lie. And it's funny because we don't, but it could be it's not really a lie. That's a debate among the Rishonim. When Beit Hillel says all kalot are beautiful, kalana b'chasuda, is that a lie? But you're allowed to say it. You want to tell the guy's getting married, your best friend's getting married, and you're not attracted to the girl, or you don't think she's good looking, or whatever. I know it's not nice to talk this way, but that's what the Gemara says, So you're going to tell him? That's so not nice. So you can lie just for truth. That we all know that, right? For Shalom Bayit, you can lie. That's also part of Shalom Bayit, not necessarily just your household. Or do you say it's not a lie? It's not a lie, especially when it comes to beauty, because beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. There's no definition of beauty. He likes her. Now it could be he's attracted for other reasons, whatever it is. So it's not, but that's a side interesting argument. But we know we are allowed to tell a mistruth. Nonetheless, the Torah, and possibly because we're allowed to tell a mistruth, the Torah says you better run away from it. In other words, because in 3% of the time or 1% of the time you're allowed to tell a white lie, so the other 99% of the time you better run away, because otherwise it's going to influence you, right? If I never could lie, okay, so I don't have to run away. I know I can't lie. But no, lying, sometimes I can lie. I'm going to stretch the lying. No, you better run away from it. So it's just so you have the same idea. We have to run away from someone who's a negative influence on us. And the biggest negative influence are not the people we don't like. It's our good friends, right? Teenagers especially are so influenced that they get into drugs and all kinds of, I mean, that's more serious, but the drugs and other issues, less serious, more serious issues, because they're very conscious of what their friends have to say. That's it's very hard. That's what I try to teach, It's part when teach Avram, the greatness of Avram, he stood alone. The greatness of the Jew, we're willing to stand alone. We wouldn't be here. Nobody would be here today if our ancestors weren't willing to stand up for what they believed in against Avram HaIvri. We're on the one side of the river. Everybody's on the other side of the river. But it's very hard. It's very hard. And therefore, it's a long bracha. Right in the morning, we finish Birchat HaShachar. We're soon going to go to work. So we have to ask God. We shouldn't be tested. The HaShachar shouldn't get it. We shouldn't come lidei avera. I also love that expression, to the hands of sin. We shouldn't come to the hands of sin. We all sin. That's human. That's normal. We grow from sin. Sin is a way to grow. Their sin and their sin. Lidei avera means the sin has gotten a hold of us. Got it like in a bear hug. Lidei avera. The sin shouldn't innocent, but that's always the expression. Lidei avera. And v'tavkenu b'yetzer hatov. We should, our Yetzer HaTov should get the better of us. Now, we should cling to the Yetzer HaTov, Masim Tovim, and good deeds. And we ask you to pray to God, help us to overcome our inclination. Now, we know the Midrash famously says the Yetzer Hara is really important. We need the Yetzer Hara. We wouldn't do anything. The Gemara says you wouldn't procreate, you wouldn't go to business. Yetzer Hara is very good. You just have to channel it. It's not that we want to destroy the Yetzer. First of all, it's not possible to destroy the Yetzer Hara, and it's not healthy, and and we shouldn't. And we should use the Yetzer Hara. We have to manipulate. We have to use the Yetzer Hara in a smart way. The Yetzer Hara is also very smart, so we have to outsmart it, but we have to co-opt it, coerce it. That's an inkopet yitzreinu. Sort of force the Yetzer Hara. Take the Yetzer Hara. Don't destroy it. Manipulate it so it can service God. We can, and there's so many ways we can take our negative traits and try to, use it more positively. Rabbi Salanter, mentioning him. So he said, it's a lot easier to learn. He said, you can learn all of Shas, to learn all of Daf Yomi backwards and forwards 15 times. It's easier than to change one character trait. We know how hard it is to change. And the Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva, see, it's in chapter 7. That's the problem. It's not the beginning of Hilchot Tshuva, where the Rambam writes that real Tshuvas are character traits, not to love money so much. It's interesting. He writes that as a character trait, that the Ridifat Hamamon, the running after money, running after kavod, all the things we humans like to do. So it's good. Running after money is good within reason. And, let's say you have a tremendous Yetzer Hara to make money. Okay, that's you're not going to get over that. You know what? Become a billionaire. Sign the giving pledge. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, promise to give at least half away. Give 99% away, 94% away. Give it away. That's great. You can use your Yetzer Hara. I don't like to learn. I just love business. Okay, so you can use that Yetzer Hara for a productive person. We can multiply that 50 different times. But we can't get rid of the Yetzer Hara. Okay, we should have Chen Ches Rachmi Beinechel B'nei Koreinu. That's also Beinechel B'nei Koreinu. This is a common prayer that we should find favor in God's eyes and in the man's eyes. We say it in the bench, right? I forget it now, but I know it's in the benching. Beinei Elohim B'Adam. Right, Beinei Elohim B'Adam. Vayitem Nikiyim L'Shem Yisrael. That's the Marid Ayin by Ruvain and Gad. You should be clear by the God and the Jewish, but that's our responsibility. That we should have a good reputation. We're not allowed to ruin our reputation for Jews to think negatively of us. That's Marid Ayin. That's what we call Marid Ayin. Doing things that look wrong, even though they're not wrong, because either somebody will copy you, or even if they don't copy you, they'll think negatively of you, and we're not allowed to have that. But it's also it's important that people like us, people have favor with us, and they that's very it's an important thing. We say that in prayers all the time, and then we finish up at Tigulenu Chasadim Tovim. God should give us good chasadim. So I saw a second shot I never saw before. What do you mean chasadim tovim? Good, isn't all chesed good? Right? God should tigmalenu chasadim tovim. So we've spoken many times, not many times, but the beautiful connection between a gamal and gemilut chasadim. A gamal is a camel. Gemilut chasadim is a camel. The camel is the animal of chesed. It takes you across the whole desert. It's very hard, and it doesn't need any supplies. Just drinks the same water 58 times. So the gamal is always, that's why Rivka's on a gamal. Chesed and gemilut chasadim and gamal go together. That represents chesed. But what's chasadim tovim? Isn't all chesed good? So the simple answer is no, not all chesed is good. First of all, the Gemara says if you're kind to the wicked and wicked, you'll be wicked to the kind. In other words, sometimes we have misplaced values. We put up. We have a lot of empathy and understanding for people who don't deserve it. We should have empathy but don't deserve it. And for the people who do deserve it, we don't, because there's a limited amount of empathy we can show. And if we use it all on people who don't deserve it, we're not going to have much stuff. So that's one thing. Chesed is not always good. It's not always good to do. I mean, usually it is. The other thing, of course, we know we can get spoiled by chesed, or that's what the Torah T'mima says. We say in the Rosh Chodesh benching, mishalot libeinu litova. It's slightly different, but it's the same idea. But he brings the two together. We ask God to give our heart's desires for good, because sometimes our heart's desires aren't good. We pray for things that are not good for us. We pray for wealth that may not be good for us. We pray for this. We pray that sometimes with the things we pray. Rav Soloveitchik's famous line: he prayed that he would never end up in America. He would never have to leave Europe. The Treifa Medina, what Torah is there in this land? Oh my God, he's from Britain. The Rav Soloveitchik davened he should never end up in America. And he said, "Thank God." Thank God. God said no. And otherwise, he wouldn't. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here. All of modern Orthodoxy wouldn't have developed the way it did. But beyond modern Orthodoxy too, so much. But so sometimes we don't know what we pray for. So we want the chesed. What appears to be a chesed sometimes isn't a chesed. So we ask for chasadim tovim. The other thing, this is the Torah. That's very interesting. He says, we want our chesed to be in good areas of life, not in bad areas. So he gives an example. Let's say somebody's in jail, and then he gets released early. So that's a chesed, but that's a chasadim tovim. I don't want to be in jail. I was poor, and then I became wealthy. So that's chesed, whatever. That's not chasadim tovim. In other words, chasadim tovim is that I should never be the negative, that I need an act of kindness to bring me to the positive, right? You understand? A lot of the chesed is because you are so low. We do chesed. Nebuch, you're starving. The guy, so I give to a food bank. The guy lost his job. Everything, and I give him a job. He was making $200,000 a year. Now he gets a job $50,000. It's a big act of chesed to give him a job, whatever. But that's not chesedim tovim. It would be much better if he didn't lose his job. So we pray not just for chesed, but for chesedim tovim. Okay, and then let's just see. It's 9:58 already.
Yes? It's too long for me to write. Someone named Mark Oppenheim just wrote a book about Squirrel Hill, where there was attack in Pittsburgh against the synagogue.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a chapter in there about how the community asked people not to come. People were coming inappropriately. Too many people were coming.
To see. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And people didn't listen and came anyway. And it was an imposition on the community that thousands of people were descending on this community, and they couldn't handle it.
Right.
It's interesting.
Sometimes the Rahman and son in a shiva house. Sometimes that's the idea. You can't talk to a mourner. Sometimes the chesed is not to do something. Right. The people are just overwhelmed. Just leave them alone. Right. Very, very good. Okay. Let's just very quickly review. We discussed Oteri Sherabati Farad, the Kippah, how sometimes things can get on greater importance for sociological and historical reasons, like the mitzvah to live in Israel, than its technical reasons. And we talked about Oteri, and then we talked about Yisrael Israel is only the last two brachot, really. The uniqueness of the Jewish people on Sniut, and the difference between koach and gvura, physical strength and spiritual strength. Said Hanotin koach is not in the original brachot; it was added in later, and probably, perhaps, as Rabbi Liebtag pointed out very beautifully, based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, to offer comfort to the Jewish people. It's not the Jewish people were weary after there's exile and persecution and pogroms. God gives strength to the weary. God gives strength to the Jewish people, and that's what Israel needs. An Israeli army, gvura is one thing, but we need koach also. And then we discussed the last bracha with washing our face. We noticed how the Talmud says you put on your tzitzis and your tefillin in between, because that's what you did at home. You walked to shul, or maybe today some do it in the lobby, the two brachot on the tefillin, or one bracha on the tefillin, the different customs. And then you said this bracha for washing your face. I don't exactly know. I still haven't figured out why they wait so long. If it's the original is to wash our face, mavir sheina, our eyes are washed. It should have been earlier. I don't know why. Maybe somebody can find an explanation for me. But anyway, that's what we say. And then we said the bracha, though, mainly, that's how some of the medieval commentaries say, it's when we're about to go to work. And therefore, the challenges of work. So mitzvot should be natural. I shouldn't have to think in the business world every second, is this allowed? Herkel mitzvot. It should just be a mimetic tradition. We just do it because we're so used to it. It's ingrained from when we were in our mother's milk, so to speak. It's just part of who we are, that it's natural. We shouldn't come into the hand of sin. We're up in a sin. The Yetzer Hara, especially when it comes to money, is very, very strong. And that's what we ask that. But we have to channel the Yetzer Hara into positive things. And then, of course, we run away from falsehood, because sometimes we don't have to run away from falsehood. It means the other time we have to run away from negative influences and channel the Yetzer Hara for something positive. And then we have good chesed. Chesed, when it's appropriate, chesed is not only appropriate, and sometimes it's appropriate at the time, but can have a negative impact on you, and that we should be blessed. We don't need chesed. That's really gomel chesed. We shouldn't need a lot of kindness. We should be well. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Let's see if there are any quick questions here. David's gvura versus Goliath's strengths. Yeah, okay, koach and gvura. Shimshon HaGibor. He wasn't the person who said, that's a good question, Morris. Shimshon HaGibor, what do you call him? Yeah, I have to think about that a little bit. Shimshon HaGibor, because he's really Shimshon HaKoach. Okay, I don't know. Good question. Maybe before shul tomorrow, I'll try to come up with something. Now I know why Rabbi puts on tefillin in the lobby, right? We learned that Shema is not a mitzvah, a tefillah, but a kriya. Yeah, but that doesn't mean isn't a bracha. We assume kriyat Shema is a mitzvah. We'll get there, and I don't know when, but when we talk about Shema, the simple meaning of the verse is there's no mitzvah to say Shema. When you wake up and when you go to sleep, or when you lie down and when you wake up, right? Everybody knows that. Those are the two reasons we say Shema in the morning. The simple meaning of that verse, it's talking about Torah. It's not talking about saying Shema. You should teach your children. So there is actually a debate whether there is a biblical mitzvah to say Shema. And I know that's a little startling to people, but there's a view in the Gemara that saying Shema is only a rabbinic mitzvah. That verse is not talking about Shema. It's talking about learning Torah. We generally accept the opinion that saying Shema is a biblical mitzvah based on that verse, but it's not the simple meaning of the text. But whether it is or it isn't, doesn't matter if it's we say brachot for many, many other things. Even on rabbinic mitzvah, halal, that's what I point. That was on Hanukkah. The Gemara asked that question. How can you say B'tzivanu on Neirat Hanukkah? It's a rabbinic mitzvah. Lo tasur, we have to listen to the rabbis. Torah develops the Torah, so we don't cut off Torah at the biblical period. So even though it's only a rabbinic mitzvah, it's still, that's what God wants us to do. So we say B'tzivanu. So whether Shema is biblical or rabbinic or tefillah or kriya, doesn't matter. And we said along, I will say a fascinating opinion. One of the Gaonim, I forget who, the Gaonim, the earlier periods before the Rishonim, says Friday night, when you go to the early minyan, and you repeat Shema at night, right? You go to early minyan, you get home, you have to say Shema over. It says you should make a bracha, because we don't have the Birchat Kriyat Shema. In other words, you don't make, I said, because Shema is enclosed within brachot, you don't say it. But if you're saying it alone, you're saying it, or your minyan, Sofar and Shema, in the morning, you have to say Shema. Before you go to shul, you should make a bracha. That's not our practice. We don't have that practice, but it's a fascinating view. It makes a lot of sense. It's a very interesting view that because once Shema is disassociated from the brachot, you would make a bracha on it. Okay, Gemara says halal is said on the moed. Some say yeah. So okay, I'll have to talk about when halal is the right or not. We'll have to talk about that when we get to halal. Okay, the name of the article. So I think you have to thank Atara, my daughter, for putting up the link to Rupture and Reconstruction. Thank you. And seconding your request. Oh, the article. Okay, it's up. Okay, very good. Beauties on the Azvi. Think of chametz on Pesach. Not sure what you're referring to by chametz on Pesach. You want to let me know? Chesed from a good place. That's interesting. Do you have to do chesed with the right intention? We'll maybe leave that for another time. It's a fascinating question. Unintended chesed. Let's say you have a hole in your pocket and $20 bill falls out and a poor person picks it up. Did you fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah? We'll have to leave that for another time. But does your motivations? Sometimes you don't want to help somebody, you help them accidentally. Does that count? That's a great question for another time. Vera, if you want to tell me what you mean by chametz on Pesach, I could answer in. But okay, thank you for your comment, everybody. Be well. Today's our last day in chat before the winter break. We get 2 weeks off here. I know in New York that's less common, but here it's much more common that in the more right-wing circles, not, but all the modern Orthodox schools and all the schools give up 2 weeks now for Christmas and New Year. So please God, we'll see you next week. We, of course, we'll discuss Lola Mihei Adam. We're making a little progress. Maybe in pretty soon we'll get to Baruch Shamar, to Psukei Zimra, hopefully one of these weeks. But okay. New York State is shutting down its schools. Wow, is that what you mean? COVID is wow. Okay. Yeah, here but our cases are still lower, despite the five-fold increase in 2 weeks. We've gone from 500 to 2,500 cases in 2 weeks, which that's a population of 15 million people. That's still way lower than in the States. So hopefully they won't. But like I mentioned at the beginning, the school sent out an email to all the students and the staff, take everything home with you in case when come back to January 3rd, we go back, we'll be on Zoom. We'll see what happens. Let's hope not. Let's hope that we should all be well. But yes, everybody get a booster shot if you haven't had it yet. And everybody, we should be healthy and be well and be able to learn Torah together and do all good things. Getting a booster is an act of chesed. That is chasedim tovim, not just for yourself, but for the community at large. Okay, please God, we'll see you on Sunday or during the week, other times, and next week. And everybody have a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much. Be well. Bye-bye.
Rabbi?
Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi?
Yes?
Yes, listen, a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that's always impressed me, struck me. They were all the different rabbis, Tanaim, I guess, were arguing how cruel, about how often the Sanhedrin should give a death penalty. And the second last opinion person says, if I had been
never.
70 years
Rabbi
old,
Akiva, he would have never given a death penalty. And then Rav Shimon ben
never.
Gamliel says, you would have been marbe, you would have increased murder. That all debate it's a death penalty, a deterrent appears in the Mishnah. 3 opinions, 7 years, 70 years, and never. And the fourth opinion, the final opinion, is if you guys would have been in the court, it would have been a disaster, because murderers, you're marbesh v'chutamim, you would have caused greater, or rotzkim, you would have caused more murderers because you refused to give the death penalty. Okay, that's a question we have to discuss another time. I do have to run. It is it is the day at Chat Day, the last day before vacation. So I do got to get there soon. But okay, nice to see everybody. Be well. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.